It's a real privilege to be here, actually, because I mean, I've worked just about 40-odd years as an environment regulator for various organisations. I started off doing research with Dallas University into water quality, then moved to the National Rivers Authority when the public water companies were privatised in the late 80s. And worked on various projects, including drinking water protection up in North Wales, Merseyside area. And since then, I've been an environmental regulator, regulating the water industry mostly. And most recently, I was spelling flood defence and flood risk operations. And then most recently, I've been sitting in the marine team, marine advice and planning team, where we license offshore wind and manage the protected sites around Wales. And more latterly, I've got involved with the two regulated shell fisheries in Wales, on the Bury Inlet and the Dee copper fisheries. And again, that's legacy issues of research. So I never really imagined doing that sort of career. I'd actually end up giving a talk to the Institute of Gateway Engineers. But I think my personal interests and my professional sort of interest kind of came together on this one. And as you all know, the 26th of August 2020, the oil train from Milford Haven heading east, we were drift basically at Morlais Junction near Llangennech. See, there should be a video.
Overlooking ground. So that's okay in the edge of the pension area. Okay. Good.
And there we go. Okay, that's me anyway. So, as I said, I sit in the marine advice and planning team. And because I've been involved with incident management over the last 30-odd years, both in risk operations and on the environment side, and my knowledge basically of this particular estuary, the Bury Inlet, I was asked to be the recovery manager for the Llangennech incident. And I mean, this wasn't National Resources Wales, we under the Local Resilience Forum, we're category 1 responders, so along with emergency services, but also, you know, the county councils, food agencies and so on, Public Health Wales. And really, you know, this was very, very much a joint effort, and, you know, there's no one single organisation. We couldn't have done it without everybody else, you know, getting involved and contributing. And it's, you know, I've never worked with such a diverse and wide group of organisations before. So before I get into the details of the incident and the actual recovery operation, so I'll just tell you a little bit about the Bury Inlet and Carmarthen Bay and Estuaries area. It's pretty much got the highest level of environmental protection you can get. It's a special area of conservation, it's a European marine site. It's a Ramsar flight for overwintering birds, and it's got a number of SSSIs and special conservation features around it. So it's designated for a range of different habitats and species. But primarily it's importance for overwintering birds that makes it really important. And the Bury Inlet also is a well-renowned shell fishery. It's quite a complex area, and it's got a number of issues. Pretty much you've got the accommodations to the north are highly populated, from Buryport through Pwll and Elli, Gowden, Binghamton. So quite dense populations, and the whole west of Swansea as well. They all have got, you know, sewage collection systems. They feed into Llanelli water treatment works with a number of storm overflows dotted around the coast, and the same on the Gowden side. You've got two blue flag beaches in Penbrae and Brazili, just south of the estuary, and a number of undesignated bathing beaches within the estuary as well, at Broughton and Buryport, and lesser extent Llanelli. You've also got the largest salt marsh in Wales, which is Llangefni Marsh, and salt marshes extend further up the estuary as well to the Llangefni area, and those are really heavily grazed from salt marsh lamb. It's salt marsh lamb is a sort of well-renowned delicacy, along with the shellfish and the cockles from the estuary itself, and that gives us a bit of a conflict in terms of regulation and management. It's had issues in the past, going back to the early 2000s. What was one of the most productive shellfish fisheries in the UK, or possibly in Europe, suddenly the shellfish started dying, the cockles were dying en masse, huge swathes of mass mortalities. Nobody knew the reason why. And various investigations were put into effect. Because of my water quality background, I was asked to manage the Welsh government funded investigation at the time, and we were working with universities from around the UK. Lots of modelling was carried out. This is just an overview really of the hydrodynamic modelling that we use. These are actually two country models, Welsh water models, but we asked them to develop these models as part of the National Environment Programme or the Active Management Programmes. And basically what you've got a series of hospital models, the basically Atlantic models, very coarse scale, moving into Celtic Sea models, slightly finer scale, and eventually getting finer and finer and finer until we get to models for the Bury Inlet, where the resolution of the cell size basically is down to just a couple of meters. And it's really hard to model hydrodynamically simply because of the shallow water and the very, very dynamic nature of the estuary. It's a bit of a delay. Right. I mean, one of the things we use the models for is we want to know what the quality is, what the water quality is at all different points within the estuary. And this is because this is where the shellfish beds are. So this is what source apportionment. So basically, all of the inputs, including the sewer network inputs, the river inputs, any diffuse inputs like the fishing from the marsh on the south side, we're all plugged in. And then based on those little cells you saw, which basically calculates movement and how much exchange and dilution there is between each of those points in 3 dimensions, eventually you can work out quality in different places. And this is a huge part of what we do, and it drives basically the improvement programs we got in place. This is what drives where Welsh Water spend their money to put better storm overflow storage systems in place, really topical on the news at the moment. Tremendously Garrick and catchment areas. They were doing basically sustainable urban drainage and storm water storage 10 years ago. Before it's only just coming in now. It's only just hitting the national debate now. So Welsh Water spent about 115 million, basically putting in the system of converting anybody green, any sort of roundabout school playing grounds, putting new surface water sewers in to basically take surface water out of the Farrow network to protect the bathing waters and the shellfish waters in the Bury Inlet and Carmarthen Bay area. This is the kind of the output of some of the models we get against modelling the salt marsh here, just to understand what the bacteriological inputs were into the estuary. And most recently, as again I mentioned earlier, the copper mortalities that had happened a number of years ago continue until very, very recently. We've done UK study investigation. We found out all we could work out within the UK, and we come to the conclusion it was probably parasites and probably linked to either climate change or changes in the industry in terms of where cockles are sold and processed and what's brought into the area, biosecurity, all those kinds of things. So we were very lucky. We were able to push to get onto an EU-funded programme, which we probably wouldn't get onto now. Atlantic Programme, where the 250 in Wales, the Dee estuary and the Bury Inlet were part of this international collaboration, basically. So we had about €3.5 million and scientists right across Europe in 5 different states just focus purely on filtration corridors. And some really, really interesting things in terms of, risks through disease in Southern Europe, becoming more prevalent in Northern Europe, ocean current migration, all these kinds of things. So it's probably fair to say that the very that we probably understand from an environmental point of view, from a hydrodynamic point of view, from a hydrogeomorphological point of view, and from a sort of biosecurity, shellfish disease, and shellfish hygiene perspective, probably better than any other estuary in the UK. So it's certainly one of the best in Europe in terms of its level of understanding. So we're really, really proud of what we've been able to do and what we've been able to find out, and how we manage the fisheries and the ecological features of the area. Before I get into again, we had a bit of a prelude back in 2016. There's oil doesn't come out of the Milford Haven refineries by train, it comes out by pipeline as well. And there's a pipeline that runs from Milford Haven to Manchester, supplies aviation fuel, supplies kerosene, so it can supply all different types of different products. And the area who run the pipeline basically knew they had a problem. They got a pig through it. They got basically like a robotic scanning device, a bit like the big yellow metal rail back recording film that goes up a pipe. So they do this from time to time, and they identified they had a problem on a section of the pipe. And it's a section of the pipe just east of Carmarthen where it goes onto the A48. And it's probably been simply because of the weight, because of traffic and so on. So they need to do some repairs. And they plan to close the eastern-bound carriageway of the A48 this week. Well, they basically dug a big trench, and it's only under the eastern-bound carriageway, but the western-bound carriageway was fine for some reason. So we needed to dig a big trench, and I think the pipe was about 8 meters down, so it was quite a bit of depth. And they basically got their GPS coordinates slightly wrong. So while they were putting their sheet piles in to make the trench, they actually put one of the feet piles through the pipe. So I was sat in our office in Llandarth in Swansea, minding my own business one Wednesday afternoon or whatever it was. And a call comes in from our Carmarthenshire environment team saying, "We've got a bit of a problem, can you open in our scene room? We've got some oil in a river." So it's like, okay. So we often get oil incidents, you get domestic oil tanks, you get road traffic collisions, you get those type of events. And you're thinking, okay, 300 litres, through oil absorbers, some spillage mats and so on. You'll probably be fine. And then we get the report in that it's 30,000 litres. So it's like, okay, this is a bit different. And finally, the final figure turned out to be 140,000 litres, which is probably about half what Llangennech was, but it was into a very, very contained, small little stream, a few miles sort of east of Carmarthen, which discharged into the upper Towie estuary, and again threatened shellfish beds. So it was a bit of a dilemma. We knew the oil was going into the river, but we didn't know where else it was going. And just to the north of the other side of the hill, if you like, from Nantec House, you've got the Capel Dewi water extraction on the River Towie, which then pumps to the Lindra water treatment works just north of Swansea and supplies all Swansea and a good part of West Wales with this drinking water. So we were a bit concerned at one stage because we didn't understand the hydrogeology, we didn't know what direction the oil was going in, all these kinds of things. But luckily, where the rupture occurred, there was a surface water culvert just above the pipe, and because of the pressure, most of the oil actually went upwards and it went into the surface water culvert and basically out down the river. And the responders, the Valero, used their specialist oil recovery contractors, many of whom were actually working with us again on the Llangennech incident. And they were basically able to put a series of booms down the river, and you basically build pipe dams. So you dam off the river, put a pipe, that creates a pool. In the pool, you could put lots of oil absorbent seas, and these little flight saucer skimming devices, which basically just skim the oil and suck it away for recovery. And apart from the initial escape, they were on the case pretty quickly. And I think they recovered something like about 90% of the oil, which is phenomenal. You know, it's never known a recovery rate like it. So went back to the refinery, got basically separated and went back into supply. So got a bit of an interesting journey. So that was 2016, and as I said, it was probably the biggest incident we'd had up to that time. Coincidentally, just last week, we've had another oil incident on exactly the same stream, similar amount, about 70,000 litres again. And this time it was the service station at Nantic House. Somebody broken in, they've got overground oil storage tanks, diesel storage tanks, and somebody tried to nick about 20 or 30 litres for their car, put a siphon in, drove away, left the siphon in place, and it just drained the tanks completely. For a stream which had a huge amount of investment and was restocked with fish and everything else after this incident has just been hit again. So it's we need to move away from oil as a fuel source, I think. Okay, so just a little bit then the structure and how the incident was dealt with back to Llangefni. So on the night of the 26th, obviously declared as a major incident, the usual local resilience forum command structure gets put in place. You've got gold, silver, bronze command, and basically all of the LRF responders were working. It triggered the normal sort of oil spill response, so Maritime Coast Guard Agency involved. They've got specialists, they can do specialist modelling, again using standard models as shown you earlier. And an environment group is set up, and the environment group's purpose was to, to ensure public protection basically and protection of the environment. So I'm going to go through all of the statistics with you again. I mean, it's been the largest oil incident we've dealt with since the Sea Empress oil tanker disaster down in Northern Avon. Although it wasn't anything like as large in quantity, it's probably only about 10% of the Sea Empress. The locations were so much more sensitive in terms of affecting shellfish freeze, affecting triple ice, affecting special areas of conservation. The loss, it was somewhere in the order of 300,000 litres, and some was burnt off, some went to ground, some went into the watercourse. My involvement with it started probably about the early hours of the following day. I got a call from our Endo, our environment duty officer, who I know very well, work alongside. And I got up in the middle of the night, a bit sort of bleary-eyed. And it's, thought I'd let you know, there's been a train derailment. Okay, it's a freight train, right? So sort of, it's pricking up now. There's been an oil incident, so it's like, okay. So quickly trying to get the brain in gear, and the information I'm getting is there's a number of wagons have been derailed, there's fire, and there's a loss of oil, and nobody quite knows how much. And it's in the Llangefni area, right alongside the Bury estuary. So finally putting the problems, finally processing, and suddenly working out. You're saying, so what you're telling me then is you're not telling me this is the oil train, the oil train. And it's like a long pause, and it's like, yeah, we think it is. So it was like instantly, right, okay, this is really, really serious. And then, as I said, our the officers were already on scene. They couldn't do much because the whole site was in the hands of the fire and rescue service. The fire burned for 33 hours. Nobody could get actually on the site or very close to the site for all of that time. So during this time, we felt like a bit of a phony war almost, where we were just gearing up. We were going through our maritime oil spill procedures. We needed to get out on the shellfish beds. We needed to understand the extent really of where the oil was and what sort of effect it was having. So first night, I was out on the beds. You can see all this is sort of the this area. You can see orange on the surface there. This is looking out across the shellfish beds. Just trying to get as many samples as we could from as many different locations.
Accidentally turned your Zoom on. If you click off, then, yeah.
Right.
And click back on the picture, it should. Click.
Okay. There we go. So this is one of our, it's actually a contractor who works with us on surveys and was in the area. So it's just get out there, it's just get as many samples as we can and with many different locations. So we have teams out all across the estuary, north and south shore, and then inspectors, contractors working for the oil companies and the freight haulier. We're on site and doing similar work in the other part of the estuary. So after we got as many samples as we could, as soon as the crash site was declared safe, this was what confronted us basically. And you've probably seen all the pictures before, but you know, this was the wooded area to the north. This was the area which was primarily affected by the fire, and it was just pools and pools of oil on the surface. So it was, as I said, you know, sort of 30, 40 years, never ever encountered anything like this. It was quite sobering just to sort of wander around and see the immediate aftermath. Attempts were being made very early on just to sort of put dams in place, those cesses, you know, those ditches to the north and south of the formation, and basically sort of whatever oil absorbers were being put in place, filters were being put in place. So very, very, very quickly, mitigation measures were being put in place and assessments were being carried out. First of the week or 10 days, it was still in emergency mode. 400 people had been evacuated from their homes. You know, we kept up there to be put up in local accommodation, village halls and things like that for the first sort of 24, 36 hours. There was the, as I said, the Strategic Command Group at the time was actually being chaired by the British Transport Police. It was under their jurisdiction. And then there's the various silver and bronze groups and the environment group. And my involvement was then mostly through the environment group. And we get to thoroughly influence by studying models from the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency telling us where the oil was, what concentration, how it was spreading out into the Wildbury Inlet, Commanding Bay, and so on. The fortunate thing was oil is a relatively light oil, so relatively volatile. So it doesn't stick around in the environment that long. It's not going to give the same long-term effect that, say, a heavy crude has got or something like that. So it was a constant getting samples from the shellfish release. They were going off via to the CFAS, the Centre for Environment, Fisheries and Aquaculture Science. They've got laboratories on Lowestoft, so we would shuttling samples back and forth to Lowestoft. I'm sorry on the screen. That's the touch screen. So, so this gives you an idea of where those sample points were out on the estuary. So there was mid-channel samples, which were taken by boat, obviously, and then there were shore teams taking samples from the thin line. The red dots is where oil was being found, green dots were clear. And what was reassuring was the actual models, the Maritime Coast Guard Agency models, were reflecting very well what we were actually seeing on the ground. So that was giving us quite a lot of confidence that basically, we could trust the models. The part at the bottom left there, that's our shellfish sampling points. The red dots is where we're taking samples specifically for shellfish to go off to be monitored for polyaromatic hydrocarbons. And they were the ones going to see if I could look off for analysis. And the purpose of that was basically to check levels of aromatics in shellfish flesh. And that was for public health purposes. We were working very closely with the Food Standard Agency, Swansea and Carmarthenshire Public Health Departments, and Public Health Wales. I think that's just a zoom in of that last slide, and there's a zoom in. We have concentrated in some of the crofty area, which was actually where the shellfish beds were, so that was an area that got a bit of attention. I think it was actually about 10 days. The emergency phase of the incident wound down. Up to that time, we've been having, daily, they've been daily silver bronze meetings, daily environment groups. And once it had gone, the site had been cleared, once the site was safe, once it was out of emergency phase, it quickly went into recovery phase. And that's really where controls and command of the recovery operation then moved to Natural Resources Wales. And Martin Evans, who's the South Wales Area Operations Manager, he then became student command group sort of chair. And I was working there directly for Martin, trying to coordinate all the information between all the various groups. So the meetings went from daily to weekly. The tactical group, because it was primarily focused again on the public health elements of it, of the incident and the impact on the shellfish. That was chaired by Stuart Thomas, who's head of public protection in Carmarthenshire. Then we had a separate, sat below with the TCG, we had a separate public health group, and again with representatives from Food Standards Agency, Public Health Wales, various other organisations. The environment group was still standing at this stage, but that then got subsumed into all of these groups as the recovery operation continued. And very soon on, we recognised the massive economic effect this incident was having. So under the SCG, the Economic Recovery Group was set up, and local MP Neil Griffiths was asked to chair that group. So I was looking at all of the economic impact. So the closure of the Heart of Wales line, for example, the heavy industry that was impacted because Chorus or Tata were having trouble to have their steel supplies maintained and so on. As well as all of the groups impacted. It wasn't just the shellfish routes, it was the grazing on the Gower side of the marsh. There were other user groups, there was other angling groups, there was other fishing groups as well. So it's very complex. There was a lot going on, a lot to deal with. The weather was one. We're still in full lockdown, remember? So we were trying to do this, through home working, through Teams. Obviously, the site interactions have to happen live. There's no way of doing that remotely. But we had just about every challenge I think you could probably have thrown at you. We had a number of mini storms. The whole site was flooded out on several occasions. And not least, we had the Morlais water treatment system right alongside the crash site. This is just a bit of a sort of an overview of the crash site. So you've got the Morlais water treatment settling ponds to the north. You've got then the junction between the Swansea district and the Heart of Wales line, where the derailment actually occurred. You've got the heavily contaminated area, which is the sort of the purple hatched area in the middle, which was where the most of the tank cars that ruptured and caught fire spilled their oil. So that was sort of deep contamination of the formation of there. And the area, the water area just to the north. We then have the extended area, which is the sort of the light grey, which was firewater contamination basically, so it had been low runoff. It was fortunate that the Fire and Rescue Service had a good supply, ready supply of water from the main water settlement ponds. But there was an awful lot of runoff. You had an awful lot of sort of secondary contamination away from the actual main contaminated area. And then we had two drainage ditches. The southern ditch just on the border of the Marth, which was a triple SI and a protected habitat. And then the northern ditch between the full authority land and the formation. So that was basically it. And very quickly, boreholes were being sunk. Adler and Allen, who were the specialist contractors doing most of the work, working with Jacobs for Network Rail. Very, very keen to understand, where the oil was, how deep it was getting, and what started to think about the detail of the mitigation measures. So I'd say a little bit about the Morlais water treatment system, because it's kind of, it was a key feature that we couldn't ignore, and actually dictated, working very, very closely with the Coal Authority, because a lot of the impacted area was actually their land. But also, there was some serious concerns about damaging this and subsidence because of the excavations that took place later, which might have caused further problems, which could have actually eclipsed the oil pollution incident in the first instance. So the reason this is there, the Morlais mine water system, or mine system, the former Morlais colliery and Brookfield collieries on the other side of the estuary. One of the largest colliery complexes in the area. Was discharging, it's basically got an extensive network of abandoned mine workings, some of which are actually directly underneath the crash site. And it was discharging ochre, or iron oxide basically, which is toxic and was actually causing parts of the Lougher estuary to actually fail its environmental quality standards. And basically a rust-coloured plume into the estuary prior to 2003 when this scheme was put in. Basically the way it works is you've got a cascade, water comes out at artesian pressure from the former mine shaft. It then cascades to aerate it. The idea is to turn the alkaline mine water to sort of reduce the pH and convert from iron 3 to iron 2, basically, to reduce from iron 3 to iron 2, which is less toxic. And it basically does this by process of aeration, process of settlement. You've got the lagoons, and really big lagoons. They're one of the biggest lagoons. This is one of the biggest mine water treatment systems in the UK. And they do that really, really effectively. So you can see from the chart on the left there that what's coming out of the ground is about 25 milligrams per litre of iron, and by the time it's discharged into the River Morlais, which is the just on sort of the western side of the crash site, it's down to 1.6 milligrams per litre. And this whole system is completely passive, there's no energy, it just does it completely by gravity and just purely artesian pressure, allowing the water to escape and run into this lagoon system. The total effect of that is that something in the order of 150 tonnes of iron is actually removed from the environment purely by this passive system. So it's quite an impressive system. I mentioned the underground workings. There's some real serious problems, because you can see where the junction is, where the crash site is. You can see the other Morlais there seeing its way. So that was the extreme sort of southern end of the derailment, and then it extends across the system of mine workings. The whole area was just absolutely riddled And some of these were not that deep. They were, could be less than 5 metres below the surface. So the concern was, because all of that might go to the artesian pressure, if any of the excavation had ruptured into that, anybody who remembers the Morlais incident in the mid-90s, we could have had literally our investment wiped out pretty much the entire environment. So that became critical in terms of some of the works that happened later. And there again, just sort of getting everything there. That's actually the whole keeps being put in. And just on the plots, really, just to sort of give you again just a feel of the how the surface oil was being removed. So again, pipe dams created on the north and south sides of the two ditches, absorbent materials, booms and oil skimmers, basically. So not rocket science, but works really effectively. When this was sort of during the intermediate phase of the works, where boreholes were going in, and this was all about just going about wherever the plumes of oil were in the ground, and kind of decide what the best mitigation strategy was going to be. And the kind of processes were, do you just leave it there? Do you sort of try and pump it out? Do you use some sort of active treatment system? Or do you just remove all the contaminated material as much of it as you can? And it was the latter that's eventually won the day, primarily for speed, because treating groundwater, treating sort of contamination is a long process. These were bags of ballast going in. Again, the Avon Morlais was a particular problem because this was on the sort of southern side of the site, and there was a lot of oil escaping into that. So it's a case of trying to make a bit of a dam, a bit of a pool. To allow a network of pools and pillows and skimmers to be set up upstream. There we go. So this is the first east abutment of the bridge over the Avon Morlais, and there's quite a bit of seepage coming out around that structure. So there's a number of layers of defence trying to protect that watercourse. Again, that was the more permanent structure, which actually required land drainage consent from our flood engineers to put that in place, which they did in the day. Pretty impressive because they normally take months. And again, that's a view from the bridge of the brooms trying to stop the oil coming out from the bridge abutment. So the site is starting to look, vegetation has been cleared, temporary tracks put back in place. Everything's looking a lot more organised. Again, this is the one of the ditch. Still quite a bit of oil coming out into the surface water. One of the issues we had was tidal inundation, basically. On the south side, and we still picked really on because all site flooded. We had to pick the clean tide on at least one occasion. So a lot of effort was put in just basically protect the marsh, protect the left side, the Llangefni marsh. So what you've got is a series of booms, pillars, and a double barrier. The idea of the double barrier is that when the tide comes in, it basically keeps the oil film to one side and sort of protects the marsh area. And that was really effective. That worked very, very well. I've never seen that before, but really, really impressive. It's a case. That's with the tide out. You can see the blue pipe, which is basically the perforated air pipe, which provides that bubble barrier. And there it is again in operation. So again, this is the thermal impoundment. And when we started getting to the decisions made, lots of discussion, as I mentioned, you know, what's the best way to treat all material, and the decision was made fairly quickly that because we need to speed to get the Swansea district out of Wales lines back open again, then probably the best approach was actually to excavate as much of the contaminated material as possible. So this was works up on the top end of the site, where they started to create areas where contaminated material could be moved and dewatered for taking away. All long-term structures will be put in place again on the two ditches. This is a constructed oil interceptor. Again, it's required environment permits, or 2 permits actually. So again, it's passing 2 chambers, pipes below them, contaminated water enters, oil flows to the top, and then the secondary sort of scrubbing chamber, if you like, where hopefully you take all the oil out of the first, but you've got a second shot in it, so with skins again. So those are long-term, those are going to be in there for probably years as a precaution. And that's the completed structure. That's the north one. This is the view from the edge of the lagoon, and this is where the excavations were beginning, basically, to remove something like, it was 12,000 cubic meters. It was stretched something like 150 meters by 20 or 30 meters wide, and something like 30,000 tons of contaminated material was taken away over the December, January, early February periods, 2020, 2021. This was the that contaminated area was basically dewatered, and the bottom of the area, which was about the size of 3 big swimming pools, was put in place on the top half of the site. So that's the plan for the excavation, basically the removal of the contaminated materials. So it was 4 series of cells. The idea was each cell could be completed in a day or 2. We didn't want the rest to go off. Once the cell was excavated, they wanted to backfill it as quickly as possible because they didn't want the rest to go off oil material sort of remigrating in and contaminating the further area. It got particularly quick use in this bit, there's some indents and so on, couldn't go quite as close to the bridge as they'd have liked, again, because of the risk of undermining the bridge abutments. There were some areas where we were concerned about upwelling mine water and didn't want to dig too deep in those areas. So it was quite a complex process to decide exactly how far you could go. Obviously, to take as much material away as possible, but at the same time, don't sort of create any unnecessary risk. And the other concern was because of the bund of the settlement lagoon for the Port Authority lagoons. There was concern, they were very, very close. They were probably 2 or 3 meters above the track, and then were excavated 2 or 3 meters below the track. So you're looking at quite a head there, potentially, if there'd been any subsidence with heavy vehicles moving along that track as well. Very good. So this was some of the excavation. This was one of the cells being excavated and then immediately backfilled. And we went quite a length to actually make sure that the quarry material that was brought in was actually sourced from local quarries in Carmarthenshire, in Pembrokeshire, to ensure that its sort of structural, its structural properties and its geological chemical properties matched the sort of bedrock and materials that was already there, the carbonaceous material there, but also had the correct pH properties and so on, because there was concerns about bleaching to the triple SI. So it wasn't just any old rock. There was a lot of thought process, a lot of sourcing and finding the right material that had the right structural properties and everything that was required. This was that wooded area, which is now being backfilled with topsoil. Boulders are going back in. We're getting sort of a blind spot, if you like. There was a whole 50 plus boulders were put in when, soon after the incident. And then everything was excavated. You lost all your boulders, then they had to put boulders back again. So it was a case of almost doing everything all over again. And, hopefully all the oil had gone, but not all of it. So it was a continuous learning process and understanding, has the excavation process achieved what it was supposed to have achieved? And that's just an aerial shot of sort of nearing completion of the backfilling process. That's the final compacting and HDP liners and netting and just structural integrity. And then sort of the final tracks back in place. And then sort of the final landscape and the topsoil going back. This was the site where the big sort of processing areas for the government here, which all went up to a recent 30 Merthyr, by the way. I did that with when the lorry movement it was, I've forgotten what it is, but it was hundreds, thousands, I think. And this is the site would have been the final stages just prior to the planting and the opening of the route. I think this was actually opening day in March. And again, it was in time markets, the tide still comes in, finish those ditches. In the southern side of the site. Looking railway-like again. So that's pretty much it, really. I said there's a huge amount of information out there. The Rail Accident Investigation Report is a wealth of information. There's a really good website as well. You could read all about it on our website. And Adler and Alan, the contractors, I think they've done a video, they've got various presentations, going into a lot more technical detail on all the work they've done. But yeah, sorry.
All right, thank you very much, Stuart. So, moving on, got any questions?
Perhaps a silly one. Do you think the big fire helped or hindered in the sense that did the fire help burn off some more that otherwise would have leaked? Or did it do damage by denying you access from and if it would have leaked anyway?
Well, it burnt off, I've got figures and I can't remember them off the top of my head, but I think it was probably around about 100,000 litres that was burnt off. So obviously that didn't get into the environment, so that was a good thing. Whether the fire, the trouble is you just couldn't do anything. There's nothing could be done. There was no way, I don't know how many tenders there were there. There was, dozen tenders, pumping continuously for 33 hours. And nothing could be done in that phase, really. So you've just got to deal with whatever you're left with. But certainly, a significant amount of oil was burnt off. So that is less oil to have to deal with. And then, of course, there was the pumping out of the wagons that were left, making sure they were safe before they were carried off site and everything. So we're just going to deal with what we're presented with, basically.
Right. Questions?
Were there long-term effects?
Right.
Of this will be just cockle beds and the marshes and things.
I mean, basically, there's no oil out in the wider environment at all. That's all dispersed, all biodegraded. We had the cockle beds were closed for 7 weeks. We were regularly taking PAH samples throughout that period, and they were coming back for the areas we were taking them. We know some areas of cockles did die in certain areas, but on the harvesting beds, they were coming back less than 5 microns, and basically at safe, well below public health levels. So we're confident that there's no long-term, we're still monitoring. We were doing monthly monitoring for about a year, and then that's dropped down to 6 monthly monitoring, and that's carrying on for this year again, I think, and then we'll review that at the end of this year. But all the indications are that, that's not going to be an issue. There is still oil in the ground. And one of the difficulties is, because we've now got boreholes to the north, boreholes to the south, we're having trouble getting to the south because we need a cost to cross the line, or the contractors need a cost to cross the line, and there's all sorts of issues with getting them when you want it done and that type of thing. But we've got a fragmented groundwater record now because we don't know actually what's underneath the formation itself. So we've got still a few hotspots to the north, still a few hotspots to the south. Nothing like on the scale that it was, less than 10%. My colleagues in our hydrogeology team, they're trying to work out, we need more data. There's been a period where they didn't get a lot of data from the south side of the site because of the access issues, because it's now an operational railway again. So we're trying to plug those data gaps to decide, does it need some sort of active remediation, in other words, pumping out, or is it, do we just allow it to naturally evaluate? So that debate is ongoing, but, it'll be monitored for probably decades. And as I said, those surface water interceptors, they're in there for the long term. So, but, there's no doubt that through fast action, through the contractors knowing what they were doing, maybe having the practice, a few years earlier on the A48 incident, they were very, very quickly able to stop a lot of the oil getting out. I mean, my worst years at start, you think train crash, oil tanks, huge amount of oil, ballast, porous, this was going to go whoosh, spread out into the environment. But because of the subsoil, because it was on a colliery site, there was this really dense, horrible, claggy, sort of bituminous material. It just acted like a sponge, and most of it stayed there, so very, very little got out onto the marsh. There was a bit of a spray effect on the marsh from one of the wagons, which telescoped, they called the coke cap. So there was a little bit of sort of surface contamination, but there was no real, again, the southern ditch, prevented oil getting across. So it's, I take my hat off really to everybody involved, but, an environmental disaster was averted. And, it'll probably be a contaminated site for the foreseeable future with filthy and oil leaching into Milford Haven from, the oil plant with Pembroke Dock that were bombed during the war. So we're still getting looking out of all of them to flooding conditions, certain rainfall conditions, certain tidal conditions. But there's interceptors there, there's boreholes there, it can be managed, it can be contained.
Okay. Any other questions?
Obviously, a massive clean operation, it's all the final bill.
I mean, it was met by DB Cargo's insurers, basically. I mean, I've heard rumours in the order of about 25 million. We haven't had that confirmed. I mean, one thing I didn't mention, which we can talk about now, is that simultaneously whilst we were working on the recovery and the cleanup, we had another team within NRW who were gathering evidence, working on, basically the enforcement, possible prosecution side. And realising the REIB report and all the network of organisations involved and contracts and subcontracts, and different regulators right across Europe. A couple of weeks ago, we basically came to the conclusion that there was no realistic possibility of us being able to take criminal action against any, individual or company, which was a big disappointment because there were, affected parties who are still out of pocket. The Cocklers are out of pocket. They lost in the order of about £170,000. We know parts of had huge costs. We know there's been tourism impacts. There's been other costs as well to graziers on the marsh and things like that. So it would have been nice if there'd been some sort of fund or, sort of compensation package. But, sometimes at the end of the day, looking at the big picture, it would have been a heck of a lot worse. And it reopens the environment, the fisheries as fast as we possibly could, sort of when we flew with something on that scale isn't bad going, I don't think.
No, I think, would you say that there are some really valuable lessons being learned for the future as well? Hopefully we don't do it too often.
I think there's, we're working on the lessons learned, because I'm afraid, it's this week we're dealing with another quite significant incident. So, to a greater or lesser extent, we're learning things all the time. The local resilience forum partners, the category 1 and category 2 responders, they're learning things. There's been 2 reviews. There's a review carried out of the actual incident response, and then there's a completely separate review, LRF review of the actual recovery operation. And most of the organisations came out of that pretty well, especially considering the constraints everybody was working under with COVID, lockdown, and all those things. I think the main learning points are probably for the rail industry. Anybody who's read the RAIB report, it's pretty sobering reading in places, and there was this very sad incident a few years ago. So, I think hopefully those will be learned.
Yeah, I think in view of the recent spills in America as well, I think there's going to be a bit of discussion as well. And the Americans had a serious chemical spill in the middle of the town, and that's polluted the river, it's polluted the groundwater and all sorts of stuff. So, because I don't think they were quite on the ball to get it cleaned up as quickly as they could, or contained as quickly as they could. And again, it was a massive fire. So, right, any questions from anyone online?
No, I've just prompted them, they haven't asked yet, so. Yeah.
Okay, right, any more questions? Right. Okay, are you there, Phil?
Oh, I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you through here.
Can I ask Phil if you could provide a vote of thanks, please?
Okay, well, by the wonders of modern science and technology, I'll wish everybody a good evening. It's Phil Ransom. I'm actually residing in the Peak District at the moment, so quite a long way from where you guys are. Anyway, I was a bit surprised earlier on. I decided this presentation looked as though it may be a very interesting presentation in the section meeting, so I sort of booked onto it earlier on today, and then only what seemed a few minutes later, Andrew Wilson rang me and asked me if I was going to attend the meeting, would I be willing to do the vote of thanks? So I thought, well, why not? Let's give it a go. So if the technology holds up, we'll do that. What's really struck me, I think, we as permanent way engineers and railway professionals, we spend our lives trying to create and maintain a safe railway system. We try to ensure that incidents and accidents don't occur. I guess if I'm brutally honest, probably our major focus is looking at passenger rail traffic. But here's a very timely reminder that traffic carries with it its own risks and its own consequences. And what's been very interesting, I think, from this presentation, obviously we as railway engineers would be very focused on the primary calls and the immediate repairs, remediation, getting the railway running again. But we're looking here at a major environmental incident and looking at the cost and the implications both to the environment and to the surrounding area, the economy, etc. So I think this is a very timely and interesting aspect to consider. So I'm sure possibly a fairly minor mistake or issue has led to what was potentially an absolute catastrophe. What we've heard here is how that was averted to a large extent. A very costly operation to clear up and clean up the environment, and I'm sure that work will continue. But through some good fortune and certainly through the efforts of everybody involved, and Stuart has talked about many people involved, that has been mitigated to a large extent. So I'm not going to go on any further. I think we've had a very interesting presentation, and I would like to thank Stuart for making this time and giving that presentation. I hope others are able to see the recording and learn from this. But perhaps you could all join me across the airwaves and thank Stuart in the traditional way for such an excellent presentation. Thank you very much, Stuart.
Thank you very much, Phil.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Right, so just before